Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, and as Malcolm would say, friends and enemies, it is I, the Catawba Valley Aboriginal. Today is Tuesday, November 11th or 12th, I don't remember which, 2019, and you're listening to the Chronicles of Chaos. I'm watching the news this morning, and, truth, these days the news is Trump all day, every day. Trump, Trump, Trump. We're currently in the midst of this impeachment inquiry, and white people are debating among themselves whether or not a crook is going to be treated like a crook. They're trying to debate whether or not white privilege is going to extend to the President of the United States. Because quite frankly, he obviously carries himself like a mob boss. All his boys are going to jail for conspiracy, for lying, and all this kind of stuff, just like a mob boss. And sooner or later, somebody's going to decline to take the fall for his ass, so we're going to see. But the fact of the matter is that Trump is in the position he's in for one reason and one reason only, is because he is the champion of white supremacy in America today. He is the white supremacist in chief. I take the position that Andrew Gillum took in his race in Florida when his opponent, that Cuban dude, that racist Cuban dude, basically called him a monkey. And Florida people voted him anyway. But the Cuban dude tried to get slick on him and tried to hyperventilate when the suggestion was that he had done something or agreed with racism against his opponent. And he said, I haven't done anything for you to call me a racist. And the brother, to his credit, came back slick. He said, I'm not calling you a white supremacist. The white supremacists are calling you a white supremacist. And they've done the same thing with Trump. In fact, you have a whole slate of Republicans all across the country, and a couple of Democrats too, who got in office basically because they're trumpeting white racial resentment and white supremacy. I've always said that one thing, people will let you know who they really are and believe them when they tell you who they really are. And number two, success breeds imitation and repetition. Success breeds imitation and repetition. For example, if you're on a football team and you're having success running up the middle, you keep running up the middle until they figure out a way to stop you. Then you start going into your playbook. But until what you're doing is unsuccessful, there's no need to stop it. That's the point and the purpose of you being out there in the first place, is to have some success. And until what you're doing falls short, there's no need to change the game plan. And the same thing with white supremacy. Now, the problem is people think it started with Trump. No. We're in a 400-year race war with these people. And when I say we, I'm referring to the, you call it foundational black Americans, you can call them ADOS, American descendants of slavery, you can call them 1865ers, people like me, who, just doing a cursory review of history, we can tell you that 1865 was an ethnogenetic moment for the black Negro colored person in America, because prior to the passage of the 14th Amendment, all black people, whether free or slave, were not considered citizens. All black people, or I should say no black people, whether free or slave, were citizens of the United States of America. We know that because during the Dred Scott decision, I believe in 1857. I mean, you might want to check the date on that because I don't have any reference in front of me. But the Dred Scott decision, and I want to say 1857, came out against Dred Scott, who was a slave that had been brought by his master, moved by his master, when his master moved to free territory, and I believe it was Missouri, during slavery days. And because Missouri was free territory, Dred Scott, the so-called low IQ individual, the black man, the slave, figured out that, hey, we're in free territory. Y'all can't enforce slavery on me, so I'm getting ready to get my little bag over here, massa, and deuces. Bounced on him, so to speak. It's a lot more complicated than that. I think he was purchased by some abolitionists who set him free. But the court case went through because they thought it was an important issue. And the Supreme Court of the United States of America voted against Dred Scott, or decided against Dred Scott. And the majority opinion was written by Roger B. Taney. Roger B. Taney was a Maryland slave owner, which should have been cause for him to recuse himself from the case to start with. But more than that, he was also Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he wrote those famous words that the Negro has no rights, which the white man is bound to respect. And his justification for that opinion, he said it quite simply that the founders of the United States, the framers of the Constitution, never intended for black people to be citizens anyway. It's a white country. In other words, white supremacy is the law of the land. So the idea that Donald Trump introduced white supremacy or racism is ludicrous. The whole history of the country has been exercised in race war, which is where I deviate from the common perception that all black people in America are African Americans. Some indeed are, but not all of us. In fact, it's strange that the only ethnic group in the world that calls itself African Americans are the people in America. And by my calculation, if you've seen a previous video of mine entitled 5% African, you'll see that I calculate that we may be as little as 5% African in our genetic makeup, at least African is contributed from the transatlantic slave trade. Okay? Pan-Africans are hilarious. They want me to believe, and they've told me in different times and places, no, brother, you're not just a slave. You're the son of African kings and queens. Get out of here. I said, to start with, we can't all be kings and queens. The math doesn't work. That's just all that there is to that. The math doesn't work. We're not all descended from kings and queens. Let's get that out. Let's get it out of the way. They weren't putting kings and queens on them damn slave ships. Okay? So the ones of us that do come from Africa or have direct lineage to Africa weren't kings and queens, maybe a handful. But for the most part, we were peasants. And the fact of the matter is that we keep having this nostalgia for Africa, when those of us, or that of our lineage, that goes back to Africa, and I'm speaking about the 1865, it's not the so-called African Americans, but the people who were classified as black, Negro, colored in 1865. Our heritage mainly comes from Aboriginal tribes. And like I said, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, so go back and check out that other video. And I know I meander, go from place to place as I do these things, but there is a section there when I lay out the math as best I can. I do have a college degree in accounting. I did get A's in statistics and economics for that matter. So you can take that or let it alone. I don't claim to be an expert, but I am conversant in the basics. So we live in a culture in which white supremacy, to me, is like the ingredients of a cake. Okay? When you take a bite of cake, and I do love cake, I'm sure you do too, you don't taste the salt in it. You don't really taste the flour. You taste something sweet. You may taste vanilla, but for the most part, the bulk of that cake, the egg, the flour, the salt, the baking powder, whatever it is you choose to make your particular cake, you can't taste that. All you taste is the end product. But the majority of it is flour. So you ask yourself, if the majority of this cake is flour, then how come I can't taste the flour? It's because it's baked in the mix. And that's how white supremacy is in America. It's baked in the mix. And every generation seems to forget. Every generation seems to pretend that the law of cause and effect does not apply. Every generation seems to have a problem enforcing the code that has kept us alive all this time during these race wars. And every generation has to be reminded, which I guess is the reason I felt the need to do these things. Because we're forgetting. We're forgetting the people that we live amongst and around. We're forgetting what motivated them to come over here anyway. This is our home. I used to say when I was debating these white supremacists on different platforms that you're wasting your time telling me to go back to Africa. Because my people were standing here on the shore waving at your people when they first arrived. And it's true. One of the first voyages exploring the eastern coast of the United States on behalf of the Europeans was taken by Giovanni Verrazzano in 1524. He landed at one point in time on the coast of North Carolina, which is present-day North Carolina. He came to the shores of the Cape Fear River. He disembarked, got off the boat, and the first people he records meeting are people he described or compared to Ethiopians. Black as Ethiopians, dark unlike Ethiopians, depending on how you read the language. And while people might want to dispute that, the fact of the matter is that those people knew what an Ethiopian looked like. Okay, Ethiopian was the first black person that Europeans came into contact with. Ethiopians and Egyptians. They are the quintessential black man. They are the ones referenced in the Bible during the passage that ask a question: can a leopard change its spots or an Ethiopian its skin? That's an indication of the uniqueness of the Ethiopian appearance. So we were literally waving at them when they got off the boat, 1524. So all this nonsense about 2019 being the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the black man in America is bullshit. It's uneducated. It's propaganda. So in one sense, I do agree with the Pan-Africanists. We don't just come from slaves from Africa. We primarily come from the Aboriginal Americans that were already here. And so when you think about that and you think about how history has been contorted, things have been omitted, things have been changed, you start to get a picture of a long-time psychological operation being foisted upon the black man, black, colored, Negro person in America. They bought into this out of Africa idea. It fit right in line with what they wanted to do. And what they wanted to do basically was get you up out of this country after you built it up. I saw a video from a college professor, I think it was the University of Connecticut. I call him in my mind Mr. Peabody because he had this really little way of talking, and he wore these wire rimmed glasses. This white guy, and he had calculated the value of unpaid black labor to the United States of America between 1776 and 1865, less than 100 years. In today's money, the slave ancestors, the black, Negro, colored man of the United States of America, in less than 100 years, have contributed $14 trillion in today's money to the economy. 14 trillion unpaid. And you ask reparations for what? Listen, whether you believe we will get reparations or not, if you're an ADOS, a foundational black American, you cannot deny that a debt is owed. And if you want to say, well, slavery was too long ago, these are people who come from immigrants. They don't have any skin in the game. The only skin the black-looking immigrant has in the game is using his appearance or her appearance to move their way through the social strata, because they didn't leave anything on the plantation. They're not like me. They don't have ancestors' bones buried in plantations. There's 2 plantations within 10 miles of here from which my ancestors came or were made citizens. I lived down about 3 miles from a camp meeting that was established by some of my ancestors. Not simply mine, but mine were among the number that established this camp meeting. It's on the National Historical Register in 1871. In 1871, 5 black churches sprang up too when the white Christians decided they didn't want to go to church with their former slaves anymore. They didn't want to share pews with their former slaves. Strange, because one of the main parts of the Bible they kept preaching was slaves, obey your masters. And obey them, render unto them not eye service, but with fear and trembling, as if you were obeying God himself. They put themselves in the position of God. That's a serious thing. So when we keep talking about equality, remember. When we keep talking about justice, remember. When we keep talking about fair play, remember that for people who have privilege, equality is a demotion. Okay? Equality is a demotion. So you might ask yourself, why are these same people, they can go around every 4th of July crowing about freedom and liberty and independence and all that kind of stuff, don't talk about equality. And let's go ahead and let's disabuse ourselves of one thing, another concept, right here off the bat. The American Revolution in 1776 was not a revolution. A revolution is an event or a movement that results in a fundamental change from imposition. Those on top go to the bottom. Those on the bottom rise to the top. That's a revolution. The Haitian Revolution, that was a real revolution. The so-called American Revolution was just a hostile takeover. Anyway, I'm going past my time, but I want to talk some more about Trump and the effect he has had, or the permission he has given white people to express their true selves. So in a sense, it's almost a blessing, because we forgot, after 8 years of looking at this black immigrant in the White House, it started to think that we were really part of the team. We started thinking that we were really one of the crew, but we never were in their eyes. They've developed a system by which they don't even need to win the majority. They've crafted legislation. They've gerrymandered congressional districts to allow them to win even when they don't have the majority. That is the fundamental essence of democracy. The majority wins. But the majority doesn't win. The majority of white people wins. That is the system they have crafted through gerrymandering of congressional districts and manipulation of the Electoral College. So, and white people, even so-called progressive white people, seem to be fine with it. They seem to be fine with it. All they talk about is winning over the disaffected white voter, the working class white voter, as if he's ever going to vote for anything other than a Republican. 95% of the Republican Party is white. 95% of the Republican Party is white. They are, by definition, an organization dedicated to maintaining power for, by, and through white people. That's it. The ones that have slipped through the cracks, well, are either black people looking for a job, Hindus passing as white, or other people trying to make a name for themselves by proving how anti-black they can be. And if we keep forgetting who these people really are, if we keep forgetting that we are not targeted in our communities, we are not receiving injustice because we are former slaves, we are receiving this injustice. We are being targeted by police because we are insurgents in our own land. We are not visitors. We didn't come here in the hip pocket of white people, and we don't have white people to thank for us being here. We've always been here. The Americas are Negro continents. That's a fact. The oldest skeletal remains in North America and in South America, respectively, have been carbon dated to 12,000 years of age, and they're both Negroid skeletons. The black man, the Negro, has always been here. It's strange that we have been here this long, and yet when we have a DNA test that says that we are related to people in Africa, then they justify calling us African Americans. But Native American people who claim to have been here this long, just as long, yet have not left the same age of skeletal remains, surprisingly, they are not called Asians, even though they came over from Asia. They said they came over from Asia. They are called Native Americans. But our indigenous ancestors are not. Is that propaganda? Or is that just a lie? We're not African American to the extent that we came over here from Africa on a slave ship. We're no more African American than the typical European or the typical Asian. We are African American because we are original Homo sapiens here in America. That's where our ancestry comes from. And the fact that we have ancestors in common with those in Africa doesn't really mean anything. It just means that our genetics are worldwide. It would be strange if we weren't connected to West African people, because West African people, or sub-Saharan black man in Africa, is the true Homo sapien. Everybody else is pretty much mixed with Neanderthal or Denisovan, or both. Where other people are mixed with different types of human, but not the sub-Saharan African. I mean, Yeah, as dark as I am, I have white ancestors. So, you know, and it's strange that living in the southern part of the United States most of my life, I've yet to run into anyone who has an oral tradition in their family of coming from Africa. Plenty of us in the southeastern part of the United States have an oral tradition of coming from Aboriginal people. We've lost their names, we've lost the language they spoke. But that is not what lineage is. Lineage is not a language, lineage is bloodline. And our bloodline goes past the plantation to the tribe here in Amaruka, not in Africa. Anyway, that's all I've got for this morning. I'm out.